my friends, I just requested for permission to record. So if you don't mind to accept that and to know that this particular event will be recorded. So please feel free to be present through your camera, or else please know that you may appear on our social medias. Be a star, be a star.
Star for one day, afternoon. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Star for an hour.
Yep.
So welcome everyone to our NTI conversations. Today we're going to do something really special. We are going to be privileged to take a first look at the findings of a Buddhism in Australia survey. So if I please can have the next 2 slides. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the country on which some of us here on site are on, the Wodi people of the Darawal Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Also, I'd like to pay my deep respect to the ancestors and elders of the Wadaworong country, Eastern Mar country, and Wurundjeri country, where Deakin University's physical campuses are located, and that we have a privilege to partner for this particular survey. We also acknowledge the many First Nations from where everyone else is joining. So with this, I'd also like to recognize the triple gem of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as the lineage, philosophy, and communities of practice that we in the Humanistic Buddhism Center have the privilege to abide by. So today's conversation is on the exciting Buddhism in Australia survey. Some of you have helped us by entering this survey sometime over the past 9 months. It was the first such nationwide survey of its kind and conducted as part of a Buddhism in Australia research project. The survey instrument was developed over a period of more than 9 months in consultation with monastic and lay Buddhist leaders, scholars, and First Nations knowledge holders. And it was administered online in 7 community languages. So we are very, very fortunate that actually the hand behind this survey, Professor Andrew Singleton, is an expert. He's the Professor of Sociology and Social Research at the Deakin University School of Humanities and Social Sciences. His research interests are so broad. They include young people, new religious movements, global Christianity, secularization, non-religion, spiritual, the new age, religious change, and contemporary survey methods as well. And now to that long list, we are adding Buddhism in Australia. I shall not take up too much time. I'd very much like to invite Professor Andrew Singleton to share with us these exciting findings. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Venerable Jouet, and I will just start my slides up. There we go. So I want to just also acknowledge that I'm at Deakin's corporate campus in the Melbourne CBD, which is Wurundjeri country. And the corporate campus explains this strange glow that I've got around me today. I'm not as ghoulish in real life as I appear. It's just the strange corporate light. So please indulge me. So I'm really excited to sort of share the first peek of our findings from the Buddhism in Australia survey with you. Today I'll speak for about 25 or 30 minutes, and then there's ample opportunities to ask questions before we conclude at 2 o'clock. And I'd like to thank the Venerable Jouet for inviting me to speak today. So I'm honoured to be with you. All right, so the things that I'm going to talk about are summary of the findings. I'm going to talk about the sample characteristics, so how large it was, how representative it is, and how confident we can be in the findings. Then I'm going to talk about what the survey said in terms of Buddhist identity, the ways in which people identify and see themselves as Buddhists in everyday life. Then we'll talk a little bit about belief and practice, because both are important to contemporary Buddhism as it's practiced in Australia. And I'll also talk a little bit about community and belonging as well, because we had a whole bunch of questions that asked about that, how people think that they fit in community and society. So let's begin with the survey itself. So data were collected between September 2025 and June 2026, and we collected it online via the Qualtrics program that was hosted by Deakin University. And I'm sure many of you participated in the survey, though it's anonymized, so we've actually got no idea in particular who answered it, but you had to be over the age of 18 and either identify as Buddhist or participate in Buddhist practices or have some Buddhist belief. And so that was the criteria for inclusion in our survey. The recruitment was largely done through the efforts of others, many of whom are here today. So it occurred through Buddhist temples, centres, organisations, community networks, and also social media. So I'm glad someone took responsibility for social media, because I'm definitely not savvy in social media, but that was a very powerful way we got the message of the survey out there. One of the amazing things was that the survey was available in a number of languages. So it was Cambodian, Chinese, Korean, Sinhalese, Thai, and Vietnamese, in addition to English. So it allowed participation across a range of Australia's Buddhist communities. And you can just see there what it looked like if you're answering it in Chinese or in Sinhalese. So that was the different versions that were culturally available to people to participate in our survey. We had 3,500 people start the survey and 2,317 completed it. And so one of the things we're interested in as social researchers is the completion rate. That's someone who gets through the entire thing and answers all of the questions. And so we got a completion rate of 66%, which is fantastic, particularly for a survey of this length and complexity, in the sense that we're asking lots of questions of people and looking for a lot of detail. And so all of the data that I report on today and in our subsequent report is on people who completed the survey. I can do stuff with the 3,500 who actually participated at some point, but in order to have kind of completely comparable answers, we just like to look at the completed sample. So that's 2,317 people. So this is a huge survey by any measure. A typical opinion poll, like the kind that they're running constantly now to discover how popular One Nation is or whether Labor's on the skids, whatever, they typically have a sample of between 1,000 and 1,500 people. So when we're looking at a survey of almost 2,500 people, it's extremely reliable. I want to next tell you just about the profile of the people who answered the survey. So you can see the age profile. So this is not Buddhists in Australia. This is people who answered our survey. So you can see we've got a range of people across the age groups, from those who are aged 18 to 24 all the way through to 65 years and over. We've got a gender breakdown of 56% female, 42% male, and we also asked about other ways people identify. We've got representations from every state and territory in Australia. We've got people both born in Australia and overseas. So 27% of the sample was born in Australia and 73% of the sample born overseas. We also asked about the Buddhist tradition that people primarily follow, and you can see the breakdown there. So the major Buddhist traditions in Australia, plus other people who didn't care to say, are represented in the survey. Now, you're probably wondering how representative this is of Buddhists in Australia. So the only benchmark we've got is the census. The Australian census was last conducted in 2021. So we've got a census coming up in just a few weeks. So what I did was look at the people in our survey who said that they identified as Buddhist, which was about 9 out of 10 participants. And so I compared for age, gender, and country of birth. So the survey it's kind of matches the census in terms of gender. The profile of our survey respondents, they're slightly older than Buddhists in the census, and country of birth, we've got slightly more people born in Australia compared to the census data. But for the most part, it matches pretty well. The main strength of this particular survey is kind of the breadth of people that we spoke to, but also the large numbers of people in each of the Buddhist traditions. So what that means is that we can make very meaningful and robust comparisons between people who follow different traditions. So we can't make absolutely rock hard generalizations about Buddhists in Australia from the survey, but we can get a great indicative idea, but we can make very robust kind of conclusions comparing the different Buddhist traditions within the survey. One of the really exciting things that I said before is that 73% of the sample was born overseas. So that kind of represents the profile of Buddhists in Australia from what we know in the census. And we have people from dozens of countries, but these were the main groups of people participating in our survey. So Sri Lanka, Australia, places other than those other places you can see listed: Malaysia, China, the UK, Vietnam, Hong Kong, Singapore, and New Zealand. So we had, I think, more than 30 different nationalities represented. So people living in Australia, but born overseas, and that very much represents contemporary Buddhism in Australia. One of the important things is that when we are looking at sort of different Buddhist traditions in our survey, underlying that is a very particular kind of configuration of country of birth. So in a way, so Theravada, for example, in our survey is almost like a shorthand for people born in Sri Lanka. Mahayana is almost a shorthand for people born in China, Hong Kong, and Vietnam. So we can see this in this particular chart. It shows the country in which people were born and the proportion of people in that country and the particular tradition that they follow. So you can see people born in Australia follow the biggest variety of Buddhist traditions: Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana, and others, or they didn't specify, whereas people from Sri Lanka predominantly follow the Theravada tradition, and China, Hong Kong, and Vietnam, as I said just before, predominantly following the Mahayana tradition. So when I'm comparing later in the survey, when I'm comparing traditions, in a way you can think of it as a shorthand for country of birth. So it's worth kind of paying attention to that. The first question we asked is, how do people relate to Buddhism? For some people, it might be a religion or a faith. For other people, it might just be a guiding philosophy or worldview. And so what we did was give people the opportunity to tick as many as apply. So that's why these percentages add up to way more than 100 people could say the ways in which they think that they relate to Buddhism. So 75% of our sample, almost 3/4, said that for them, it's their guiding philosophy or worldview. An equal proportion of people said it's a religion or faith for them, as well as a source of purpose and meaning. And 53% said it's a connection to something larger. Only 36% said it's something about their cultural identity. So you can see here that for most people, it's a source of purpose and meaning in life, a religion and a faith, and not just something that they've inherited culturally. So it suggests Buddhism in Australia is a living and breathing tradition, not just something that's inherited from people's forebears. Next, we asked about Buddhist practices. Now, I should say we've got a whole lot of things that we asked, and so I'm just presenting today top line findings from the survey. And these were the major practices that people undertake. And in particular, we also asked about frequency. Is this something that you just do once or twice a year, or is it something you're engaged in weekly or more often? So across the top, we can see at least half of our sample is undertaking these following practices weekly or more often. 65% are meditating weekly or more often. 63% are chanting or repeating a mantra. Half of our samples reading Buddhist scripture, and 51% read Buddhist teachers at least once a week. Less common in terms of weekly practice is attendance at temples or centres, volunteering at a temple or centre, teaching Buddhism to others, attending a Buddhist group, or engaging in ancestor rituals. Now, on the bottom line, it's not to suggest people aren't doing these frequently. It's just not the predominant thing that they're doing as Buddhists or as Buddhist practice on a weekly or more often basis. So what we're seeing is that personal practices dominate Buddhist life in Australia, while organisational participation is less common. And this is just a little breakout. So if someone told us they're engaged in meditation, then we asked a whole lot more questions about that meditation. So you remember from the previous slide, I said 63% of the sample was kind of meditating weekly or more often, but this is asked of everyone who meditates. So if you said you didn't meditate, we're not asking you this. So most people who meditate draw on multiple sources of instruction, and they practice a range of meditation techniques. So firstly, we asked is, what's your source of instruction for meditation? How did you learn? How do you stay encouraged? And so on. So an overwhelming majority said from a monk or nun, via a video or podcast, a late Buddhist teacher, or contemporary books, and a plurality said from canonical Buddhist texts. So obviously this adds up to more than 100%. So people are using multiple sources of instruction for their meditation. And from memory, just remembering the analysis, I think people are drawing on at least 2 different sources for their meditation practice. We also asked about the particular technique, and you can see the most common loving kindness metta-meditation and mindfulness meditation. More than 2/3 of those meditating engage in those particular practices. 60% almost engage in breath awareness, and a large plurality are engaged in vipassana meditation, so doing the insight practice. About 55% told us that they've participated in meditation courses and retreats. And we also asked about the experience of those people who've attended. So the print is too fine, sorry for me to read what it says there. So I'll leave that slide up for just a second so you can read it yourself. I assure you I've got my strongest glasses on, but just with my small screen, I can't actually read what that's saying. Okay, on to the next slide. Now, I should say all of this is reported in detail in our forthcoming report that's due out towards the end of September. Now, Buddhism is often framed as a faith or a tradition centered very much on practice, but also it maintains core beliefs as well. So we asked about these in our survey. We asked about core Buddhist beliefs and the proportion of people who, yes, definitely agree with these propositions. So people could say yes, maybe.
I'm in the middle of the Zoom, so just...
Sorry, someone else is talking there. So you can see a high level of agreement with the with these major beliefs. So 96%.
And will you be here for dinner?
Sorry, can someone just mute that person? 96% say compassion is essential. 95% say mindfulness is essential. 95% say the Four Noble Truths are essential. 94% say life involves suffering, and 92% definitely agree with the Eightfold Path. So there's a very high level agreement with those core Buddhist beliefs. Same with karma, enlightenment, non-self, and rebirth. So what we see is that ethical and practical teachings attract near universal agreement from our survey sample. Belief is lower for those more common metaphysical concepts, particularly non-self and rebirth, but agreement is high across all of these. So I think that's super interesting as someone who studies belief a lot. It's unusual in any tradition to see sort of such agreement with those core beliefs and tenets. Another key part of our research was to ask about participation in Buddhist community activities. So we asked this question, how often, if at all, Have you participated in or helped with activities at a Buddhist temple, center, organization, or community in the past 12 months? This is not just about attending for the purposes of performing a ritual. This is about going and participating, doing a ritual, or also helping at a temple, center, or organization. So 41% at least once a month, 35% a few times a year, 13% not at all. So the broader picture that emerges from here is a community that is engaged to some extent in community activity. Buddhism in Australia, amongst our survey participants, is not just something done in private, but it's done communally. And it's really important to bear that in mind. It's got this strong level of communal practice in addition to those personal layers that we talked about just before. We were curious too. People said, yes, I'm participating, but where are they participating? So this is the percent of respondents who have participated in or helped with Buddhist activities in these settings. So multiple responses are allowed. So where are they going and where are they helping out and so on. So 84% of people at a temple or Buddhist centre in Australia, 29% at a Buddhist organisation or temple outside Australia. And I think that's really important because it kind of highlights the transnational character of the Buddhist community in Australia. And you remember before that at least 73% of our sample was born overseas, and the census shows that's even higher amongst Buddhists in Australia. So I'm not surprised to see that 29% in a temple outside Australia, reflecting that transnational component. And we asked about online participation as well. And we also asked in quite some detail about the kinds of things that people are doing when it comes to their online Buddhist practice. I won't go into that today. You have to wait for the report when it comes out. We spell that out in quite some detail. So that's something to just hang out for. 23% are participating in informal settings, such as helping friends or elders with their practice. 21% a community-based or cultural organisation, as opposed to distinctly temple or Buddhist centre, and 6% in a youth or student Buddhist group. Which doesn't surprise me because, the lowest proportion of people responding to our survey were those aged 18 to 24. I'm even pleased that we got some young people in this survey because it's very, very difficult to get young people to participate in any kind of survey. So I'm grateful for their participation. So we could say that participation is centred on Australian temples and centres, but people are also engaging through overseas, online and informal networks as the locus of their participation. I just want to touch on briefly differences between traditions. So in our forthcoming report, which is currently with our graphic designer, who's going to do an amazing job with the data visualization, we report on these differences between traditions in much greater detail, but I just wanted to touch on them now. And remember, when we're looking at differences between traditions, we're also kind of looking at regional and country-based differences as well, because, for example, the majority of those who are following the Mahayana tradition live in Sri Lanka and so on. So in terms of belief, across Buddhist traditions, there was strong agreement on core Buddhist teachings, particularly compassion, mindfulness, the Four Noble Truths, and Dukkha. And differences where they were present, because, for the most part, there's strong agreement. Differences were most evident for rebirth and non-self, with Vajrayana respondents reporting the highest levels of belief and secular Buddhists the lowest levels of belief. By secular Buddhists, those are people who just didn't identify with any of the major traditions and, for the most part, were largely engaged in practice and belief without a further identification beyond that. Practice patterns varied more than belief. So Vajrayana respondents reported the highest levels of regular meditation, chanting and study, while secular Buddhists remained highly engaged in meditation, but were less likely to participate in chanting, scripture study, and other forms of Buddhist practice, which doesn't surprise me. I think with the kind of popularization of mindfulness techniques in the past 2 decades, I think it's attracted people to certain kinds of Buddhist practice where they're not necessarily drawing on other kinds of Buddhist practice to complement their meditation practice. And in terms of participation, again, we didn't find that much difference between the major Buddhist traditions. Temples and Buddhist centres in Australia are the principal sites of participation for all traditions. The main difference is that Vajrayana respondents are more likely to participate online and in informal settings. In contrast, the Theravada respondents are somewhat more likely to participate through Buddhist organisations or temples outside Australia. So perhaps more of a transnational element in that particular community. I won't spill out the percentages today, but we do, as I said before, report on them in some depth in our forthcoming report. We had a large tranche of questions that were about community and belonging, whether people felt that they'd experienced racial discrimination, religious discrimination, how they felt about other minority groups in Australia, and just how they felt bonded to the broader Australian community. So I'll just give us a little peek into that. So this is people who reported fairly or very strong sense of belonging in Australia. So 77% said they felt very or fairly strong sense of belonging to the Australian community. 34% said that they've never experienced ethnic discrimination. So the corollary of that is about 66% are saying, oh, I have experienced racial or ethnic discrimination. And 64% told us that they've never experienced religious discrimination. So unfortunately, there are experiences of prejudice that Australian Buddhists or Buddhists in Australia report. That's not so much about the faith tradition that they follow or their practices, but it seems to be about their cultural or ethnic identity. But notwithstanding, reporting a strong sense of belonging to the Australian community, which I think is a testament to the success of our multicultural policies. And I appreciate now that there's some kind of political winds blowing against that, but this kind of study highlights the importance of religious acceptance and religious tolerance, which has been the flavour of Australia's religious mosaic for the past few decades. And then just to conclude, one of the things we did at the end of the survey is that we gave respondents the opportunity to say anything further about their experiences with Buddhism. So about 879 people wrote something. They could write it in the language that they were responding to us in the survey, whether that's Chinese or Thai or Cambodian, and then we translated that back. So 5 major themes emerged from these responses. So the first theme was that people said that Buddhism is a source of personal transformation. People said it's profoundly life-changing, and in some situations they said it saved their lives. They said it's helped them recover from depression, anxiety, trauma, and given them greater compassion and patience in everyday life, and also helps them navigate illness, dying, and grief. So that was a major theme. I should add, we did ask quantitative questions about these things, about how Buddhism contributes to well-being and other things like that, which we report on in more depth in the report. The second major theme was that people talked about Buddhism as a way of life. They said it's something to practice rather than believe. So it's not just blind faith, as might characterize other traditions that emphasize belief so much more than practice. People felt that teachings like the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path provide strong guidance for their everyday life. And they also described Buddhism as a practical philosophy that fosters mindfulness, compassion, and ethical living. The third major theme was the importance of community and Sangha. So teachers, temples, and communities are vital in supporting practice, and we saw that as evidence before in some of the other findings I talked about. Someone described the Sangha as making their heart sing, which I thought was delightful. And people also talked about community and volunteering, creating purpose and connection. And the Rain Body group was praised for the inclusion of LGBTQIA+ people. A common theme that also emerged, interestingly, was Buddhism as compatible with modern science. So it's not a tradition that's antithetical to progress and scientific discovery, but something that can work well, a philosophy that's compatible with modern science. People even said Buddhism is science, Buddhism and modern science go together. And some people also commented that secular mindfulness in schools benefits student well-being and society. And I've actually done a whole lot of research about the kinds of things that people do in schools to help young people with health and well-being, and indeed mindfulness is increasingly practiced in Australian schools. There was optimism about Buddhism in Australia, confidence that it's becoming an established part of Australia's religious mosaic, as seen as a mainstream part of Australian culture, and a community and groups that spread messages of peace and kindness. And also some, the Australian community and the Australian Buddhist community is understood as welcoming diversity of Buddhist traditions and teachers. There were also critical reflections on contemporary Buddhism, concerns about increasing nationalism, power imbalances and abuses of power were mentioned in our qualitative responses. People also highlighted the need for gender equity and also the need to address institutional sexual abuse and for better support for survivors. And to be mindful of protecting people from financial exploitation. And some people commented that Buddhism must adapt to the 21st century Australia and be better understood in society. So taken together, these responses highlight Buddhism's positive contribution to meaning-making, well-being and belonging, but they also point to issues that need to be considered and addressed by Buddhist leaders and communities in Australia and Australian society at large. So thank you. I will hand it over now to Venerable Shui for moderating questions.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you for those exciting insights. It was just wonderful. And, I don't know how you do it, right? You receive thousands of responses and you're able to put everything so succinctly in a few slides and highlighting all the main things. This is really a science and an art in itself. But thank you so much, Andrew, for the presentation. It's now time for Q&A. So for anybody who is interested to know more or there are any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, and share. Or anyone in the room here as well, please feel free. We have the expert now. So this is the opportunity. So everybody, yes, Gowan, hi.
Yes, look, thank you for a wonderful presentation, and I'm delighted that so much has come out of the survey. It was obviously worth all the effort that went into it. One of the themes of Buddhism as it has moved around the world historically is that it adapts to new cultures and countries, and that there's a difference between, as it were, first and subsequent generations very often, both in their practice, but also in the kind of place that Buddhism has in their lives. And I'm aware that this is a one-off survey, but I just wondered whether you had any reflections from it on ways in which Buddhism is adapting to Australia in particular.
So you can see firstly in the profile of those born in Australia compared to those born in different countries, you can see much larger variety of Buddhist practice and belief amongst those who are Australian born. Then also, amongst those who are Australian born are kind of much more likely to engage in practices without necessarily having an affinity with a particular tradition. So that's also present. But one of the things that we saw is this kind of generational kind of sort of pattern as well. So that the people that were most engaged, particularly in terms of personal practice, like daily meditation, regular reading, teaching Buddhism to others, tended to be older. So that seemed to be sort of something that deepens with the life course. Though it was the younger people who are more likely to accept some of the more sort of esoteric beliefs such as karma or rebirth. It doesn't surprise me, because if you look at sort of research that we do on teenagers and young people, there's huge open-mindedness to those kinds of beliefs. So I think they're the kinds of main findings. And also in terms of gender differences, women were more likely to sort of accept, engage, participate, and so on than men in the sample. So they're the kinds of main currents that I see. I still need to do further analysis about sort of adaptation and development. So we've got that data, and I think that's probably going to be the subject of an academic paper that we're going to write that comes out of that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, it might be quite interesting for us, Andrew, to triage that data with what we found in America or in other places, and then see what the differences may be. Yeah. So, maybe let this be the foundation for other places, to triage data with us. I see a hand up. Was it Sunim? Sunim.
Yes, thank you so much, Venerable Jiwei. And I really want to congratulate all of the team and particularly Andrew for your wonderful presentation, early presentation of the data. I'm really looking forward to digesting it and just getting a greater understanding of the profile. Just a couple of things. I wanted to know, I can't remember in the survey when I did it myself, whether you do actually ask whether whether participants are monastic or not.
Yes,
okay,
we do.
That's good. Yes.
I can't juggle screens, and I use this statistical program called SPSS, and I don't have it running.
Yes, I know.
It will take me a while to fire up the syntax, but we definitely asked
Yes,
about
no,
that.
that's great. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
really need it right now, but I was just interested to know whether
Yeah.
that was the case or not.
Yeah,
The other thing that
definitely.
I'm really interested in is whether there is any potential to do a follow-up data collection of these young people, 18 to 24, even 18 to 34, with a specific, explicit targeting of them, because I guess my experience in a limited way, and your experience, Andrew, in a much greater way, is with these young people that they don't overtly identify, but that they do have a very, a very direct relationship to the practices, particularly, and it would be interesting to capture some more of that.
Yeah, I mean, the gold standard in survey research is when you can do a longitudinal study that follows young people. And I know that there was an amazing study of religion in America, and they followed a cohort of young people from 2002 to 2020. It cost $1 million, so million US. I can only dream. But I just generally, to kind of echo what you're saying, in all the research I've done on young people and faith traditions in Australia, you're right. It's really people, labels don't matter as much as kind of the practices and beliefs that they're drawn to. And so that kind of fidelity to a tradition isn't as important as the extent to which it works for me. So yeah, it would be interesting to see, if they're engaging in practices more, whether that is sustainable without community participation, and so on. And the thing that worries me is if you don't have that community to reinforce it, then it's more difficult for it to be sustained across the course of a life. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, and I'm sort of from what I could grab in your initial slide about the age groupings who were participants, it is more representative at the latter age groups, which means that they're more, as indicated also by the countries of birth and other things, it is the more traditional Buddhists who have joined this survey, which is great. But yeah, it's a little bit from I think from my perspective a little bit lopsided.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it is. It
it's
is.
the first.
Yeah, it's hard to, it's always hard. I mean, the group in society most likely to answer surveys are women aged 45 to 65. The group least likely to answer surveys are men aged 18 to 24. So getting any at all
Sure.
is
Get that.
precious.
For sure.
Also,
No,
I
but
don't think the census tells the full story about Buddhist identity either, because people tend not to fill in the census form themselves until they reach young adulthood. So often it's like a parent ticking the form for everyone in the household. So you don't really see ownership of a tradition until people in their mid-20s. So yeah.
Wonderful.
I just wanted to just ask Venerable Jiwei and you whether it's okay to have this recording, to put it up on the Australian Sangha Association website, which is the monastic Australian monastic membership website. It's been really difficult. I mean, I'm currently the chair of the association. I've tried to encourage our members to participate, but yeah, I don't know that it's had a lot of success. So I'm interested to see to put it up on the website and give people a more in-depth understanding of what it's about.
Definitely, Sunim. Thank you for putting your hat of the chair of the Australian Sangha Association. Yes, so this recording will be available on the Nantian Institute NTI Conversations webpage. So at that time, you're welcome to link to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a few hands up. So let's go to Joseph.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Venerable Jiwei. This is fascinating research, and I'm sure that we will be mining it for diamonds for the next kind of months and years to come. I was fascinated by many of them. The one I wanted to ask about was the percentage of agreement between the doctrines. So you said two things that stuck out to me. One was that it was a very high percentage compared to other religious groups. So I wanted to know if you could kind of unpack that, what other religious groups, what you kind of have seen in your scholastic life, and why you think the cohort of Buddhists in Australia have such a high, high 90s for many. And a kind of reverse of that question is what doctrines were the lowest, what received the lowest kind of communal support?
But when I compare it to, say, the Catholic or Anglican tradition, to think of, say, the two largest Christian traditions in Australia. So the proportion of people who identify as Catholic or Anglican who then ever darken the door of a church, it's really different. So, only 1 out of 10 identified Catholics ever goes to Mass, and it's about the same for Anglicans. And also because, both Catholicism and Protestantism are kind of presented, particularly Protestantism, is about articles of faith. But that's not characteristic of Buddhism. It's about, often people emphasize the practice part. And I think that that's why there's perhaps a greater uptake, because practices are accessible and the doctrinal elements not as embedded in the same way they are with Catholicism. These are the precepts, these are the teachings. Unless you accept them at some point, you're not considered a good Catholic. Though I should say amongst Catholics, there is particularly some of the kind of more conservative teachings. There's a large variation within the Catholic community about some of those, the most conservative teachings. A majority don't necessarily accept. The second part of your question was about so there's the precepts. I think I showed the slide. They're largely accepted, but it's kind of the most ones that I would say are esoteric, like rebirth and karma, are the ones that are not as accepted as, the the Eight Noble Truths or whatever. So that kind of makes sense to me. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you. Great questions. Bruce.
Bruce is on
Bruce, you are
silent.
muted.
Oh, I said my best words before I had the microphone on. It'll be all downhill from here. What I'm interested in, being a person who always tries to sit on the other side of the fence, is what did those 800 odd people who didn't complete the survey might have said? Because quite often I've found, as a social researcher myself, that when a person's worldview is suddenly have a sense of being offside, they stop. Hey, this is starting to cut a bit deep, or I don't really want to expose myself this way, I'll give it away. And I'm just wondering if the non-completed ones had just opened it up and did nothing more, or whether they came to some particular question or invitation and then moved out. So
this is a great question. I'm smiling because it's a real social researcher's question. So the completion rate of 66% is like pretty good. Some of the non-complete was because they got filtered out if they firstly weren't Buddhist or didn't do anything to do with Buddhism. So, you know, they might have been a bot trying to answer or something like that, or they were not resident in Australia or under the age of 18. So they got kicked out after that. I guess then the next interesting statistic is how long they stayed in the survey. And I've got that data, but I haven't looked at it. So I'll have to take, like a lot of things that people have asked, like Joseph's question before, Sudham's question, your question. I can take that on notice and I can go back to this recording and just follow up on some of those things. I mean, sometimes people drop out because they get bored or they don't like it, but you're right. Was there a particular tipping point? You know, when it came to the question on diet, we're like, that's it, I've had enough, you know. I've got to get out of here. So I'll be curious to have a look at that.
thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we're all laughing here because we all know when we fill in surveys, we come to a tipping point. Very quickly these days. Yes, there's a question from Mr. Virakodi. I'm sorry if I get this wrong.
That's all right. That's fairly precise. Hi, my name is Dinesh Virakwe. I'm the president of the Buddhist Council of Victoria. Just the full report. I think I saw it in one of the emails. When will it be out? Or the final report?
Venerable Zhuwei, did you want to answer that?
Yes, that's I do. Well, the big question. So later on, I'll be announcing on the 22nd of September, we will have a project report launch. So that will be where we'll have very beautiful infographics around the survey results. And we hope that sometime in the next few months, we'll get our survey findings also published in a mainstream journal. So, but first, the community report will be ready in less than 2 months.
Very good.
And
Very
we
good. I'm
will
excited.
Me
It's
too.
actually, it's written. It's now with the graphic designer. So
Good, good.
Excellent.
And let me finally just thank the organizers and the presenters today as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really collaborative effort. It wouldn't have been possible without the over 2,000 respondents.
People.
Any other questions from anyone? Or from the room?
Yeah, I've got nothing to say.
Yeah. Well, maybe one final question, Andrew, before we close. I'm not a survey expert, but how do we know that all these questions that the team has tried to put together makes up a good and reliable survey?
yeah, so the most important thing that I did at the start was to benchmark it against the census to see how it varies. So I did make some caveats about that, about what we can and can't say. But I guess the things that I think most point to its kind of goodness and reliability is just the sheer number of people who answered it and answered sincerely rather than just giving junk answers. So that completion rate of 66% is really strong for a contemporary survey. And when you get such numbers like this, because contemporary polling is such a kind of broken instrument that, 2,500 people is a very strong voice of the community. And the other thing that I always look for is if we've got robust numbers in the subgroups, then those kinds of estimates can be really reliable as well. Because if you've got hundreds of people in one group and hundreds of people in another group, you can compare that and statistically kind of project that onto the bigger population. So those differences are likely to be true of the population. So that's why I was emphasizing the differences between the particular traditions and also the gender differences, because those are the kind of most robust things that we've got in our sort of survey practice. So numbers, comparability, this survey's definitely got that. So I stand by the product.
Yay, me too. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Yeah,
and
my
thank
pleasure.
you everyone for being here today. Maybe at this point, I'll take the opportunity to do a little bit of promotion for our next NTI conversation. Is also a part of this project. This is a 3-year-long research project, and as part of the project, we had the opportunity to visit a few places to document the progress of, I think the hard work that many Buddhists and non-Buddhists have put in order to develop the Buddhism that they know, or to keep some of these artifacts alive after so many years. And so Professor Anna Hallerforth, who has been the chief person going on all this field work and leading all of us ahead, she will be here to present Mapping Buddhism in Australia from Seeding to Flourishing, from 150 years ago to what we see today. This is really phenomenal. So I'm really looking forward to it. So if you are too, please join us same time on the 12th of August, 2 weeks from now. And following that, we also have another NTI conversation here on empathy. I think a value that many of us identify with, whether we are Buddhist or not. So please feel free to join us for this particular NTI conversation soon after that, on the 19th of August. So, and next, what we've been talking about, the project report. And together with the project report, we'll also be launching, the first such digital multimedia atlas of Buddhism in Australia that we know of. So please join us for this very exciting project report and educational resources launch on the 22nd of September at 10 o'clock. Please feel free to register now to book your place. So thank you, everyone, for all that you have done to contribute to the project, and we will be so excited to share everything with you. And please feel free to spread the word. Thank you all, and look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. Thanks.
Thank
Very
you.
well done, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're all.
Yay. Thank you for joining, and thank you, Xiaoyang, for that beautiful PowerPoint.
It was great.
Yes, always so reliable. All right. So I think we can probably, when I end this, it should all end. See, and bye-bye.